Hello boys and girls, this is Mr. Goff, and today I'll be talking to you about making scatterplot graphs. Now you all have collected your data, and hopefully you have several different experimental groups or variations of your independent variable, and you have multiple trials of each with the data that goes with it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take you step by step on how to turn this into an attractive and informative scatterplot graph. So for most of you, this is how your graph your data table looks. You have your volts here, and you have the data from each trial. All of these would normally have their units next to them, in your case, milliliters of some type of gas. However, for the purpose of making this graph, we don't want to have that. So what we're going to do is make sure that there is no unit next to these numbers for now, and we'll put them back in later in the titles. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to actually change this and make it into one column of data. So we don't want to have three different sets of dependent variable data here. Instead, we want to select all of this and drag it all into one row, or one column, I should say. Now that corresponds with this same pattern of voltage. So we're going to triple that, and I'll copy, and then I'll paste, and again, and there you go. We don't need these, so we'll delete out those extra columns. And now our data is ready to go. Now this one already shows a voltage. That is actually already the unit. This one we should change this to say hydrogen in milliliters or something like that. We can make this look a little prettier. There. Okay, so now our data is prepared. There's no units. It's all in row. And what's important here is that the independent variable is right next to the dependent variable. So this one corresponds to this one. It doesn't matter what order they're in as long as the independent variable is right next to its resulting dependent variable. So now what I'm going to do is select both columns, pull it down there, and then I'll go to Charts and choose a scatter plot. And in this case, we're just going to use a marked scatter, so we don't need to have any of those kind of lines around here. Now already our graph is looking pretty good, and we can see here we have the y-axis, or the vertical axis, and the x-axis. Now you might not immediately be able to tell which one is which, but if you look at the actual data, it's pretty obvious. The independent variable is always on the x-axis. So you can tell that because you have very clear values. You have 2, 4, 6, 8, just like you do over here. And the independent variable normally is here on the left side, and then the dependent variable is here. The dependent variable will be graphed on this axis. Okay. Now let's get this ready to go. So I'm going to delete out this legend. I'll hit just delete, and that'll go away. And scatter plots normally should be kind of square shaped, so I'm going to stretch it to be in a nice little square shape. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to put some proper labels on these axes, because you can't just leave the numbers showing there like this. You have to say exactly what this data is showing. So up here, when you click on the chart layout, you'll see this part of the little tab that says chart title and axis titles. So let's start with a chart title, and you will like it to be above, and I can just double click that and change that. So you can say that this is voltage versus hydrogen production, and I'll say what unit I'm using. Then on the axis titles, I can say my horizontal axis will have a title below. And I double click on that again. That's all I missed. And that one I know is the independent variable. So this one is going to be volts voltage applied, I'll call it. Now normally you would have a unit with any of these labels, but the volts are actually the unit. What we're actually applying there is called potential, but we call it voltage. Now I could also increase the size of this, possibly, so it looks a little better. There we go. And now I'm going to do the axis vertical tile. And now I have a rotated title in there, and I can select this, and I can call this one hydrogen produced. And then I say the unit, always say what the unit is. And for this one, I will also increase the font. Okay, so now we have a very nice graph. We have properly labeled axes, we have a title, our data looks like it's right, and you're already starting to see a shape here that suggests that there's a positive correlation between the two variables, which is kind of what we would expect here. So now what I'd like to do is to add a trend line and an r-squared value to it. And this will give us sort of some hard data to suggest whether we're right about that. So if I click on one of these dots, you see they all get highlighted. And now what I can go do is I can say chart, add trend line. Now I'll just click a linear trend line. And what I'd like to do is under options, select display r-squared value on the chart. And hit OK. So what we have here now is a best fit curve or a trend line. And this isn't necessarily saying that that's the way the data goes, but that's the closest pattern that the computer algorithm could find. And that looks like a pretty clear positive correlation. The other thing we have now is this r-squared value, and you don't really need to know how that's calculated or what it means. But an r-squared value of 0.8 is kind of a moderate correlation. So we're not going to be overly impressed by that. If it was over 9.9, then that would be a very clear correlation. But for our purposes, we'll say that this is a moderate correlation. And that is an A+ scatterplot graph that you could paste into your lab, and your teacher will be very pleased with you.